both there right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
We flew Sam in.
Yeah, we flew Sam in.
We're gonna watch the eclipse.
Oh,
and
yeah. My
Hi,
brother,
John and Glory.
my
Hi,
brother was,
Rabbi.
my brother was going out there. Well, he lives in Austin. My brother Adam, he was going back. He went back today so he could be there for the eclipse.
Oh,
Nice.
where's he at now?
He's there. He's in Austin.
Oh, okay.
He
Where are you
lives
going?
there. He lives there. Didn't you know that?
Yeah,
My brother Adam lives there. Yeah, he lives there in Austin. It was actually his birthday today. Did I call him today? I can't remember, but this day's been so long. I think I
Somebody's
spoke to him today.
tomorrow.
Yes, his birthday
It
is
is
today.
April 3rd. It
Yeah.
is.
No, mine's April 4th.
Yeah, your birthday's tomorrow. Here we have some other people from
Wow.
Texas coming on. Half of our class is in Texas right now. Think about that. Don't mess with Texas. We've got 4 people in Texas today, so that's not quite half. I don't want to exaggerate. It's
More from Texas than are sitting here.
it's
I know
one.
that's the city.
That's true. It's as many people in Texas as there are in Temple Beth on me. If you add up the rest of Santa Clarita, because we got Joyce and we got Elise and a few other people that are in Santa Clarita, but that's still over. It's over 30%. So I know there's a few of our regular people are not going to be here tonight. The Kales are not able to come on, and there's a couple other people that are going to be
Who?
here tonight. The Kales, Harvey and Sharon, are here every week
Oh, okay.
from Washington. They're part of our international contingent. There in Vancouver, Washington, but I think international. But the Schwartzes were here with us last week, and they were in Sedona, so they were technically out of state last week too. But we'll be in state for the next several weeks until the 1st of May, when I will be out of town. I'll be in Nashville for the eclipse. No, I'll be there for May 1st. I'm going to be in Nashville for a Shabbat that we're recording from Nashville. So you guys are going to hear some Nashville-based Shabbat music coming up. It's not country western. Calm down. What are you talking about? Didn't you used to do country dancing?
That's good.
Yes.
Oh, it's not all country western.
Oh, square dance.
Square dancing. This guy did square dancing and he's mad that there's too much country music. It's not country. Listen, this guy, Josh, his name is Cantor Josh Goldberg. It's actually not. It's from Nashville, but it's very not Nashville. It's not what you think. So I will tell you, it's not, yes, it's not,
They don't have it on.
it's not Nashville. It's not Nashville like you think it would be. By the way, there's a lot of pop music being recorded in Nashville
Yeah,
today
yeah,
now
yeah.
too. It's not just for country anymore. No, seriously. I mean, there's like
Not
half
sure.
of LA recording artists. I'm not talking about studio recording artists have moved to Nashville in the last few years because the cost of living is so much better and they're getting paid,
Taylor Swift.
decent amount. Well, her parents
Yeah,
live,
I
her
I have
parents live there. Taylor
I have
Swift.
a business
parents.
question for you.
Yes.
How come on some of the recorded Shabbats, you have Nefesh Mountain and Joe and some other people, and then on others you just have one? Is that a licensing issue thing?
No, it's just kind of what they give us. And in
Okay.
some cases, like with Joe, we recorded a whole Shabbat with him. Nefesh Mountain, they do different stuff, but it's interesting. Nefesh Mountain doesn't really do Shabbat. That's the one reason why we haven't done a Shabbat with them. They definitely do music they do Jewish music, but it's not as liturgical. It doesn't really follow the Shabbat music. So okay, less than some people, but cantorial stuff is
Is Mike chirping in the background? Because if he
yeah,
is,
he doesn't think Joe followed enough of the traditional.
It's not a service with that amount done.
Mike had a choice.
So okay. I will only say that people no, I mean, people have their own, it's not what I was going to say. People have their favorite stuff, but yes, listen, Mike, there is an issue which is that some of the musicians, and Nefesh Mountain would be one of them, where their music is not liturgical. It's beautiful. There's beautiful Jewish music. And again, Debbie Friedman did that too. Debbie Friedman wrote probably some of the most beautiful versions of prayers, right? Misha Berach, Ve'ahavta, the one that she wrote, you shall love the Lord. There's beautiful stuff that she wrote, but most of it was not liturgical pieces. Most of it were not.
Well, I had a few.
There were
yeah, I
not.
had A few of her CDs.
Yeah, but a lot of the songs were beautiful Jewish songs, Not by Might, a Tree of Life. I mean, there's a lot of songs that were part of her music repertoire, but they weren't necessarily, you couldn't do a Shabbat service with them because they weren't Shabbat prayers, you know? But that being said, you know, she had more than others. There's some cantors that don't write any liturgical pieces that are famous. They only do like songs that are, you know, about different messages or different imagery. And that's definitely what Nefesh Mountain does. They do that stuff. So like, for example, we just did a Shabbat with Neshama Karlebach. And again, she does Vishamru, she does Shalom Aleichem, she does Shabbat stuff, but some of it is not, it's not enough of a Shabbat that I would package it and say, this is a Shabbat
Are there
service.
traditional ones out there?
Yeah.
Are there-
Yeah, and the issue is that the traditional chazanut that Mike is talking about is out there. It's just some synagogues, you know, I mean, what we're trying to do is just show people, especially through the network, is the different styles. And yeah, probably we're erring more on showing people other stuff rather than traditional chazanut, but we definitely have it. I will also say that because traditional chazanut usually doesn't use a lot of instrumental stuff, it's not as visually interesting. Because generally what you're then looking at is somebody singing.
I know during the pandemic, you used some traditional.
Absolutely.
They
Yeah,
were good. He was good.
yeah. Well, one of the things that we did during COVID was we basically put the chazanut together, and then we used imagery. You know, we used images so that people could have visual, especially over the stuff that, for example, Kenny did. We never showed Kenny's face. I mean, not that Kenny said, yeah, don't use our face, don't show my face, but to have him standing in front of a screen, whatever.
You did show Cousin during high holidays.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or is it-
We thought that Chazanut with high holidays was pretty important, and we tried to make it interesting to watch, but it's not easy. And some people didn't like it.
One guy you had, I thought he was great.
Well, that was Herschel Fox did
Yeah,
some of it,
yeah.
and he's been at Valley Beth Shalom for
Right.
30 years, 35 years. So he's one of the best. We have
I've
Nate,
seen
we have
that.
Nate
I've
Lamb.
been there.
Yep. So Herschel is still around, he's
around.
emeritus. He doesn't do it as much, but I saw him the other day. And Nate Lamb, who was the cantor at Stephen S. Weiss for years, who is very traditional, traditional for a Reform cantor, was actually part of one of the leaders of the Cantorial Assembly for years, which is the conservative movement's cantorial group. But he was at Stephen S. Weiss for 35 years. I'm actually going to have lunch with him tomorrow, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we're going to do. But we did a Shabbat with him too. About 3 years ago, we recorded it and we put it out a couple times, which is it's called Shabbat Gems. It was for Shabbat Shirah, and it featured him and Chaim Frankel from, who's also does a lot of traditional chazanut. He's from Kehilat Israel in Pacific Palisades, which is technically Reconstructionist, but kind of by practice is somewhere between conservative and Reform. And it featured him. And so there definitely is a place for it. But as I said, visually, it's not as interesting, and it's hard, watching somebody play guitar is a little bit more captivating and it's still not easy, especially when there's only one musician like Joe. The videos that Nefesh Mountain produces are phenomenal because they're performance, and they're also some visual ones, like the one that we use a lot, the one for Yismichu, the roar that they do. It's a great video, and they spend a lot of money on their production, but they do it themselves. They're kind of self-funded. Anyways, yeah, so we're continually, one of the things I'm doing now is trying to go around the country and try to find, people around the country to show the the depth and the variety and the fact that there's great Jewish music all around the country. So, yeah, we have a lot of good stuff here in LA, but there's a lot of good stuff, well, I think, in a lot of places. Anyways, good thing to think about is how important Jewish music is right now, especially at a tough time in Jewish history. There's no question. These are tough days. I'm looking at my 180-day sticker today, 180 days. Somehow that feels like a lot, like 179 days was a lot yesterday, but I don't know if it's 10 times high. I think of half a year. I don't know. But 180 days to me seems like a long time, a really long time. Not that 179 wasn't, it's one day more, but for people that are living in a cage or living shackled for 6 months, it's kind of mind blowing. Anyways, so definitely gonna, I don't know. People are asking me what's going to happen for Passover. How's this going to impact Passover? I'm like, well, it's going to probably be going on at Passover. So, we are today beginning chapter 6, which is the chapter that's kind of a bonus chapter, because at one point, Pirke Avot ended right here at the end of chapter 5, verse 23. The last one, the Ben Bog and Ben Hey, which again, we think that those are nicknames, that this isn't like necessarily the names that they were known by. Maybe again, I mean, they're nicknames, not the ones they were born with. But we're not sure. And again, theories of, where these rabbis came from. But they finish with these great lines about studying Torah. Again, hafach ba v'hafach ba, turn it over and turn it over. But when we get into chapter 6, these added verses that were added, these were added, and they are almost going back to the way the Pirkei Avot began. Interestingly, these texts are from the same period. They're from the Mishnaic period. And the rabbis are quoted here are actually oftentimes quoted by name. In the last couple weeks, we haven't been reading ones that were attributed necessarily to a person. Some of the last ones we read were, like these last ones were, Judah ben Tema and these last ones. But a lot of the ones we've been reading were not. They were organized by numbers, by, those kinds of ways of laying out teachings, not ascribed to somebody. So these ones are, and the theme for this section, and again, as I mentioned before, the reason that this section was added was so that Pirkei Avot could be read between Passover and Shavuot during those weeks. And so every week people would read another chapter. And if they only had 5 chapters, it wouldn't get them through the 7 weeks. But the 6th Shabbos would be the Shabbat in between Passover and Shavuot. That you'd read these and study them and reflect on them every year. And this would get us through that last part of Shavuot, up till Shavuot, which was all about receiving the Torah. So, these texts that we read in chapter 6 are almost specifically about studying Torah, which of course is what we're doing. It's what the rabbis were doing. And as they wrote about this, you'll see, especially as we read this, that they were trying to give people explanations for, to some extent, the rabbinic process for what they did and why they did it.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
A little off subject. How old is Shavuot?
So Shavuot is mentioned in the Torah, right? So it's called, but with adding the meanings of this is a time of getting so ascribing the historical functions to the holidays, to the 3 holidays of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, what we call the Shalosh Regalim, was during the rabbinic period. So the rabbis, while the temple was still there, were already trying to give the holiday meaning that was not just about sacrifices. Passover was a little bit easier because there was the meal and the fact that the sacrifice, Passover was one of the few sacrifices that essentially the people ate themselves, right? So this was an unusual thing because like it already had a home component to it, if you will. But the pilgrimage part of it was very important while the temple stood. But the rabbis were already giving it meaning besides the pilgrimage, besides the agricultural significance to it, which meant that but when the temple was destroyed, those non-pilgrimage related functions to the holiday, that's all anyone cared about. But they didn't have to like come up with them after the fact. They already had them. And so they transitioned into that. They transitioned it.
Same time that Passover became one holiday?
Yes. And so Passover by this point by the rabbinic point is becoming, yes, it's at least 2,000 years old. And it allowed for Judaism to not have to kind of reinvent itself from nothing, in the sense that, again, these traditions already existed. And so they just kind of like, those were the ones that people focused on. So they were able to already have them, so that by the time when the temple was destroyed, they were able to move in. But it's a very good question. It's a very good question, because it reminds us that, like, yeah, there was a time when these holidays didn't have these, this significance. So
Because Shavuot was totally different compared when you read something in the Bible.
yeah,
with what we read today.
exactly. But I also just got a text just came through. Also reminded me that tonight, as some of you saw the email about Leon Melnick's passing, want to dedicate study tonight in his honor. His funeral is not until Friday, but he was much too young to leave this world, and but suffered tremendously over these last few years with his cognitive decline, and basically he lost, he had Alzheimer's dementia form that just kind of robbed him of his ability to do anything. So it was not an easy couple years for him. And so definitely thinking about him tonight, and dedicating studies to him, and thinking about his family. So, and Cheryl for many years came to our Tuesday morning classes, and she celebrated her adult B'nai Mitzvah with Tracy and Judith and several other people. Jeff Stein was in that group of people that studied
Oh, so
together.
they've been about as long as we have been.
No, not as long, but close. A long time, 20 years. So let's take a look at chapter 6, which is, again, this bonus chapter, if you will. So it starts, the sages taught in the language of the Mishnah, which is, again, is an interesting kind of phrase, which kind of tells us that, like, the Mishnah is already, somehow called the Mishnah, right? Because it says in the language of the Mishnah, blessed be he who chose them and their teaching. Rabbi Meir said, whoever occupies himself with the Torah for its own sake merits many things. Not only that, but he is worth the whole world. He is called beloved friend, one that loves God, one that loves humankind, one that gladdens God, one that gladdens humankind. These are all nicknames that person has if they occupy themselves with Torah. Not for work, not for money, not for, being able to say that they know a lot of Torah, but for the sake of studying Torah. So obviously, it's a great thing to do. And the Torah clothes him in humility and reverence, and equips him to be righteous, pious, upright, and trustworthy. It keeps him far from sin and brings him near to merit. And people benefit from his counsel, sound knowledge, understanding, and strength. As it is said, counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding, strength is mine, which is a line from Proverbs, which we're going to read in Tuesdays pretty soon. It's part of what we call our wisdom literature. It's sayings, as we mentioned, very much like Pirke Avot, except it doesn't have ascriptions of who says them in Proverbs, but they're collections of sayings. And here it says, again, that quote. What is it talking about? Obviously, people who are studying, people who are studying Torah. But that's not it. It bestows upon him royalty, dominion, and acuteness and judgment. To him are revealed the secrets of the Torah, and he is made an ever-flowing spring, and like a stream that never ceases. And he becomes modest, long-suffering, and forgiving of insult. And it magnifies him and exalts him over everything. So again, that is again, the way it begins, Shanu Hachamim, the sages taught. That's basically also not telling us who specifically says it, but then it gets into Rabbi Meir, who is of the next generation after Rabbi Akiva. He's in the next generation. He's one generation. According to tradition, his teacher was actually that guy, Elisha ben Abuya, the guy who becomes Acher, who becomes the outcast that goes to the dark side. But Rabbi Meir was his student, was his disciple. And he's a wonder worker, a miracle worker in his own.
Great name.
And a great name, Rabbi Meir.
That's me.
Yep, Rabbi Meir. So he was, and again, the word means to give light, to
Is
Meir.
that what that means?
Meir, from the word or.
I give life.
There you go. And so all of these things you do, Mike, you study Torah for its own sake. So these are, again, the rabbis are essentially explaining why it's so important to study Torah. Why is it so important to engage in this type of pursuit? So you can understand when people talk about why they devote their lives to Torah. These are all amazing things. These are all great things. These are all things that people would want to have. So this is kind of like, if you will, propaganda for why rabbis engage in what they do. This is all wonderful stuff. It gets even more, it gets even bigger, the rewards for studying Torah. So they're really making the case for why they're doing what they're doing, but it's going to get even more so. And so when we try to understand why do people spend hours upon hours of every single day studying in a yeshiva, well, these are all good reasons, but you haven't seen anything yet, as we say. You ain't seen nothing yet, because it's even going to be bigger. But you also see, again, in a lot of these texts in chapter 6, we'll see references directly to the Torah. In some cases, numerous quotes from the Torah in in one paragraph. So this paragraph is kind of like, this is very much the theme of the things that we will see. So again, this is all written in the language of the Mishnah, and that's what it said right at the beginning. Language of the Mishnah. This is like the rest of the previous text. It's Mishnaic Hebrew. It's Hebrew from that period. It's not an Aramaic. This is in Mishnaic Hebrew. So even if it was somewhat later than the previous text, which we don't believe necessarily it is, it just wasn't included in Pirke Avot originally. It's written in the same dialect. It's not written in Aramaic, and we have every
Hebrew considered what we call
modern Hebrew.
modern.
No, but it's closer. So it follows rules that are even closer to our modern Hebrew than biblical Hebrew. So we start to see I'll put it this way, when modern Hebrew came about, they didn't base it so much on biblical Hebrew, they based it more on Mishnaic Hebrew.
Really?
Yeah. So the structures and the grammar, the rules,
But that's only been
follow
a few
Mishnaic
years,
Hebrew.
right?
Yes. So modern Hebrew only goes back to Eliezer ben Yehuda in the late 1800s. So it's not even, it's like 150 years. So 100 years, I mean, most of the rules of Hebrew didn't exist until Eliezer ben Yehuda started laying it out in pre-state Israel. So 1890s, 1900s.
Mishnaic Hebrew?
Yeah, I can read Mishnaic Hebrew, no problem. If I only had to study the Mishnah in rabbinical school, I would have been ecstatic. But when you have to study Gemara, then you're starting to study Aramaic, and that's not the same. I mean, it's written in the same language.
Biblical Hebrew?
No,
No, I didn't think so.
no, there's a little tiny part of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. But the Talmud, the Gemara is written, the Gemara section is all written in Aramaic. And so the Gemara is most of the Talmud. So as you read the Mishnah so when you're reading the Gemara and the Talmud together, right? The Talmud is the Mishnah and the Gemara together. So you'll have a Mishnah, and so let's say this section of this paragraph, you'll maybe have 20 pages of Gemara that'll come off of that. So there'll be one Mishnah, and then all of a sudden you're in the Gemara. And so like when I studied it as in school, you know, I got to the Mishnah, I was like, oh, I can read this. And then we get to the Gemara part, and I'm like, man, it's another language. And it's another language. It's written in Hebrew letters, but as soon as you get to it, you're like, oh yeah, I'm in Aramaic now. And so it's very hard. Yeah, the Kaddish is in Aramaic. So we use Aramaic and you know, in the Kaddish, for example, it's pretty easy because the words are very, you know, similar, like Almay, which is Olam, Almay, Almaya is Leolam Ve'ed is Almay, Almaya is almost the same. Malchute instead of Malchut, you know, Yitkadal is actually the same in Hebrew and Aramaic. Let me just think of another word that's strictly Aramaic in the Kaddish, or not strictly Aramaic. Actually, like I said, almost all the words in the Kaddish are but so like Yehei Shmei Rabbah is Hushem Rabbah instead of Yehei Shmei Rabbah. I mean, it's almost the same. So in that case, it's not that hard to figure it out, but it's a little different. And so, you know, just remember that there are hard parts of Aramaic and there's easier parts of Aramaic. So it's not easy
But
when you're
biblical
learning it.
Hebrew,
Biblical Hebrew is probably, if you think about it this way, biblical Hebrew is as close to Mishnaic Hebrew as Mishnaic Hebrew is to modern Hebrew. It's a halfway point to where we are
and
today.
you can read all three.
Yeah, I can read all three. I mean, the reality is today I probably read more biblical Hebrew, or not today, for the last 30 years, because I read most of what we study is Torah.
Yeah.
But it's,
So
you
it
know,
doesn't look any different.
no, doesn't look any different, but the grammar is different. And
Gotcha.
but here's the thing. When I have to speak to someone in modern Hebrew, I have to conjugate and I have to figure out which tense I'm using. And Hebrew's not an easy language to transfer back and forth between English and Hebrew, because it's a much different, there's a whole different logic to it. It's not impossible to do. There's people who do it all the time, but it's not an easy language to go back and forth with. But it is, but I never have to conjugate in biblical Hebrew. So if I have to talk to somebody and try to explain something to them, I never have to do it in biblical Hebrew. I never have to think of how to speak to somebody in biblical Hebrew, right? Because I'm not speaking to someone. If I went back in time, then I would have to figure out how to conjugate certain things. And I could do it. It would take me, if I went back in time, it would take me about a week or two to start talking in biblical Hebrew, and then it would be easy because it's much smaller vocabulary, and I would have to just remember what the word is. Though there's probably words that we don't have because they didn't make it into the Bible, and they had words for things and it just wasn't in the Bible because they didn't use that word. But I probably would not have that hard time with it.
Words throughout the three are
Yeah,
the same.
yeah. It's not, well, for the most part, the words don't change. Well, let me just say this. We don't know necessarily. We might sometimes assume that a word in Hebrew hasn't had the same meaning that we think it does today. But when we invented modern Hebrew, we did it based on what our understandings were of biblical Hebrew, but maybe they were limited, right? Maybe they changed from the biblical time to the Mishnaic time, and maybe we don't get that.
That's what I'm wondering, is sometimes we have the wrong.
It's very possible. I'm sure we sometimes do. I don't know how often it is. There's no way to know.
Right.
There's no way to know. Only way we know is when we find, like, and it happens so rarely, that we find an ancient text where they're writing something that's not biblical in it, and then we can kind of figure out.
You should just go back in time. machine.
I would love to do that, right? Then I could figure out how these people are speaking and what,
Right.
and if I really understand them. Otherwise, I can't tell you
That's
for sure.
interesting to think about.
I can't be sure. And none of us can be sure, obviously.
Sorry,
We're
I got
talking.
you off.
No, but that's okay. It's an important question of Hebrew. Because sometimes there definitely seems to be places where we don't understand it completely.
There are times that we don't have a definition.
Correct. And that's been the case for a long time. That's why Rashi sometimes will say, we think this word is the equivalent of a word that he's using, which is in medieval French. And he'll say, I think that this word means this in medieval French. And you're like, yeah, but I don't speak medieval French. But once you know medieval French, when somebody translates it, then they're like, oh, that's what Rashi thought it meant. So here's the next text. This one is an interesting one. Again, ascribed to a Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who's quoted a lot in the Talmud. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, every day, this is a really amazing one. Listen to this, just the concept here. Every day a bat kol, a heavenly voice, goes forth from Mount Horeb, which is also the name for Mount Sinai. Every day a heavenly voice goes forth from Mount Horeb and makes a proclamation and says, woe unto humankind for their contempt towards the Torah. For whoever does not occupy himself with the study of Torah is called the Nazuf, the rebuked. As it is said, like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman bereft of sense. Which again, they don't imply that it's just for women. That's from Proverbs as well. And it says, and the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tablets. That's Exodus, right? Read not harut, graven, but cherut, freedom. So here's the rabbis doing a midrash on the words from the Bible, which says the tablets were the work of God, and the writing, right, was the writing of God, graven upon tablets. So the Hebrew phrase there is charut, but they're saying don't read it as charut, read it without the vowels as they are. Here it is in Hebrew, charut. But remember the vocalization, if you change the vowel, not even changing the letters, if you change the vowels, the vocalization, it's cherut, which means freedom. Whereas there is no free man, but one that occupies himself with the study of Torah. And whoever regularly occupies himself with the study of Torah, he is surely exalted, as it is said, from Matanel to Nachaliel, and Nachaliel to Bamot, which is on the list of where people walked from on their journey. So it's a play on those places. It doesn't really explain it here, what's going on here, but he's saying people who study Torah are like a bamot. What's a bamot? A bamot is also a word for a bima, like a bima. It's a raised, exalted place. So there's a midrash here on two words, graven and bamot. And the rabbis are playing off of those words. This is why I said that the rabbis have no issue recontextualizing words, which is why I said when Christians talk about recontextualizing Jesus, they're not doing anything that the rabbis weren't already doing by playing off of the words, right? And in some cases, letters, or in some cases, vocalizations of words. And so that's what they do here, is they're playing off of words to get us to this point, which again, what's the actual proclamation? So as I said, you thought that the first one's talking about how wonderful learning Torah is. They go even further, which is, and if you don't, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? So it's telling us that it's really important for us to do it. And again, these word plays that they do are really interesting because it's showing you kind of the rabbinic process, which is how do we derive more understanding, more learning out of text? And in some cases, they go to places that you can never imagine. Like, who even thought that the word graven could mean also freedom, Beirut? I mean, that's literally just saying, okay, we're going to play off of the similar sounding words. But again, what's the lesson? There is no free man, but one who occupies himself with the study of Torah. No one's really free until they start studying Torah. You don't really have freedom until you're in that mind of studying Torah. So they're finding again justifications and establishing why what they're doing is such an important task. So understand that these people are literally defining this life of studying Torah. Now, look, you and I know that for the last 2,000 years, that's what we've done. But remember, when the rabbis are writing this, some of this stuff that they're writing, there were a lot of people that weren't engaged in the study of Torah. I mean, we take for granted that we've been doing this for all throughout Jewish history. If the original Jews who were offering sacrifices were offering sacrifices and making offerings of their, gathering up their fields in the corners of their fields and doing those kinds of things, that's the way they understood Judaism. The rabbis actually helped invent a new approach to Judaism, which is the study of Torah is the way to study, is the way to live, is the way to engage yourself in serving God. That this was not the way that people originally in our tradition served God. So like we look at this now like, so what? Yeah, so a rabbi wrote thousands of years ago that it's great to study Torah. That was a new thing back then. This was actually like, oh, okay, well now let's make the case for it. Let's make the case against the people like we've talked about, the priests, the Sadducees, who said, what are you talking about? You don't need to study the Torah. The Torah is there. It's a guideline, a blueprint for how we offer sacrifices. And that's it. It's a manual. It's the manual. You don't have to study it. It says what to do and you go do it. The rabbis are like, yeah, it's not so simple. It's not just like, you're not just reading it on the surface. It's not just about offering sacrifices. It's about other things. And I mean, here's an example of it. These are texts that you would never decipher from reading the Torah in its purely literal form. So this is what they did. And it turned out to be the form of Judaism that survived. The Sadducees didn't survive. So again, this one is even further than the previous one, which was like how good it is to study Torah. On the other hand, this is like a warning for people who don't. So again, here we have 3 texts from the Bible, 2 from the Torah and 1 from the book of Proverbs. So you'll go through this and you'll start to see, well, I'm seeing a lot from the book of Proverbs. And we just had one up here from the book of Proverbs. So you'll see that there's certain books that get more references than others. Let's look at this one. Again, remembering that the rabbis were really engaged in something at the time a little different. So this one requires a little bit of explanation, but let's take a look at it. Again, also explaining a little bit about rabbinic Judaism. One who learns from his fellow, from his chaver, it says right here, mechavero, right? His fellow, his chaver, his colleague. That means somebody on his level, his peer, who learns from his fellow one chapter or one halacha or one verse, one word, even one letter, is obligated to treat him with honor. 4, so we find with David, king of Israel, who learned from Achitophel no more than 2 things, yet called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend. as it is said, but it was you, O man, mine equal, my guide and my beloved friend, which is a quote from Achitophel. Now, what's interesting about this is comes from Psalms. And what the rabbis just did, here's chapter 55, okay? This is the full text. I'm kind of showing it to you kind of quick. We get to this part here, right? It is not my enemy who reviles me. I could bear that. It is not my foe who vaunts himself against me. I could hide from him. But it is you, my equal, my companion, my friend. Sweet was our fellowship. We walked together in God's house. Let him incite death against me. Now, nowhere does it say that this is Achitophel. I want to make it very clear. It doesn't say Achitophel. I don't even think it says it Achitophel at the very beginning of chapter 5. No, it just says it's a psalm of David. So nowhere does it say in here that it's actual Achitophel. But the rabbis infer from this that it is Achitophel. And again, when we look at who Achitophel is, let's see if we can see it right off of here, or do I have to bring up another page? Achitophel. Who is Achitophel? Well, when we go back into 2 Samuel, he's the guy who counseled Absalom when Absalom rebelled against his father. What did Achitophel say? Have intercourse with your father's concubines, whom you left to mind the palace. And when all Israel hears that you have dared the wrath of your father, all who support you will be encouraged. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom lay with his father's concubine with full knowledge of Israel. That is one of the ways that Absalom revolted against his father. Remember, Absalom kicked his father out of Jerusalem. David had to run and barely survive this revolution against him by his son, Absalom, who was very popular. Now, Achitophel ends up giving Absalom some really great information, which is this is what you need to do in order to get rid of your father. It's a terrible scene. And by the way, it seems like this really happened. Well, Achitophel basically gives David some really, really good advice. Achitophel's a genius. He's considered one of the smartest men who ever lived. Like, knew everything, knew the future, knew the past, knew everything. Great tactician. Well, one of David's men who stays behind to kind of help David from behind the scenes, from behind the lines, so to speak, convinces Absalom not to listen to Achitophel. Now, the implication is that if Absalom had listened to Achitophel, he would have won. He would have beaten his father. But instead, he doesn't. And Absalom ends up losing the battle. And Joab, who is David's cousin, therefore also Absalom's cousin, ends up killing him as Absalom got caught in his hair in the tree as he was running away in battle. And Joab kills Absalom. Against David's orders, by the way. David told him to capture Absalom alive, but he killed him because he knew that Absalom would continue to be a problem, and Joab did the dirty work of King David. So he killed Absalom. But Absalom did not listen to Achitophel's advice. And the interesting thing about Achitophel, does anyone know what happens to Achitophel? Achitophel, and again, here's the quote about Achitophel. He's an interesting dude, Achitophel. What he does is after King David doesn't listen to him, I'll just show you what happens with Achitophel. So again, Achitophel gave Absalom great advice. The Lord decreed that Achitophel's sound advice would be nullified. So Hushai took the priests, and this is what Achitophel advised, and they tell him not to do it, right? And so here's what happens. When Achitophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his ass and he went home to his native town. He set his affairs in order, and then he hanged himself. It's very, very strange story. It also seems to be like not typical Jewish story. Achitophel seems to almost be like Japanese in his I'm watching Shogun right now, so thinking a lot about that. But he seems to almost be shame driven in that he's not listened to, and so he goes and kills himself. But that's Achitophel. I just want to remind people about Achitophel because we just read this thing about Achitophel that David had this psalm that people think is about Achitophel, about somebody who's his friend who turns on him. And so people said Psalm 55 is about Achitophel. So when they quote this psalm and say that David refers to him as his beloved and his friend, it doesn't actually say that in the Bible, but the assumption is that David and Achitophel at one point were good friends before Achitophel goes over to Absalom's side. And he's a bad dude. Achitophel is bad. It just said God made sure that his advice wouldn't be listened to. But it seems as though if it had been listened to, David would have been dead. So Achitophel is not a good person, yet David recognized him as a master, as a guide, as a beloved friend. So what it's telling us is if somebody teaches us something, and even if that person ends up becoming a schmuck, we never forget what they taught us. Even the worst person, to some extent. I'm not saying he's the worst person, but he ends up being a bad guy, really bad guy. Dave turns on David. But David didn't have any issue in the Psalms to continue to call him master, guide, and beloved friend. And so when someone teaches you something, you recognize it and you never forget that they taught you that. So I'm telling you this, they are definitely putting the project that they are involved in, the rabbinic project, right, so to speak, that project is so important to them that even if somebody screws up later on, we don't forget it if they taught us something important. Very interesting idea.
Is Achitophel really Bathsheba's grandfather?
That is an interesting question, because if you look at if it is the same Achitophel, then he would be Bathsheba's grandfather.
What was the question?
It's very Japanese, very Japanese. No, it is. I mean, I'm literally watching Shogun and I'm like thinking about the like this stuff. Yeah.
What was the question, Robert? What
Was
about
Achitophel Bathsheba's grandfather? There's an understanding that he's Bathsheba's grandfather, which would mean that he's Solomon's great grandfather. What works on that level is, first of all, he's part of the inner circle of David's family,
That makes sense.
which could make sense. It means that Bathsheba was even younger than we maybe think she was, but it's possible. But of course, what it also means is that Achitophel is Solomon's great-grandfather. And what do we know about King Solomon? Pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
So he's got David's genetics, and he also has his great-grandfather's genetics. He's got his great-grandfather's mind. So it works well for that. We don't know for sure, but it is possible that he, again, looking at the lineage, that he might have been even closer to David from that standpoint. But definitely is a problematic guy. And he was a complex guy, but he's considered one of the smartest people. And the Bible doesn't talk a lot about him, but enough that he becomes mythical in Jewish idea. Yeah, that's where he was in the book of, when he's talking about David, that's all in the book of Samuel. He's only in the book of Samuel. If he's in Psalms, that's the interpretation, but he is mentioned only in the book of Samuel. And what's interesting about him too, again, is that he becomes the paragon of genius, but also, people who should have known better. He should have used his good and powerful mind for good things. So he's a little bit like Balaam in that, he's powerful, but he was on the wrong side, right? So, yeah, he should have known better. So, but yeah, he's using an example here that even David gives him credit for calling him a master. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I also think it's interesting that, like, he commits suicide, and he's one of the few people in the Bible that commit suicide. He's not really condemned for it either. I mean, I'm not saying that, like, there's not really a justification. Like, first of all, it says he's buried in his ancestral house, ancestral grave, which seems to imply that he's given a burial, which like it goes against the idea that you're not supposed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery or in the main section if you committed suicide. But anyways, it's a weird story. It's a strange story, but I think it really happened. I mean, like when people talk about like what really happened, it seems to me like the David stories are in such detail and have such like a level of like the report. It's like a report. It's like somebody was there. So anyways, all right. So then they go further. Is this not an instance of the argument from the lesser to the greater? What we call in Talmudic rabbinic discussion a kal v'chomer, which is if the easier situation is true, how much more so this situation, right? Where it's even bigger, right? So from lesser to the greater is called a kal v'chomer argument. So well, if it's true in this situation when it's not really that big of a deal, then in a bigger deal, it's really got to be a big deal. It's obvious, right? So if David, the king of Israel, who learned from Achitophel no more than two things, nevertheless called him his master, his guide, and his beloved friend, then in the case of someone who learns from his fellow one chapter, one halakha, one verse, one word, or even one letter, all the more so is he under obligation to treat him with honor. And honor means nothing but Torah. As it says, it is an honor that sages inherit. And the perfect shall inherit the good. And good means nothing but Torah, as it is said, for I give you good instruction, do not forsake my Torah. So you can see what the rabbis do here. They make several logic arguments, right? This is when we talk about logic, studying logic and logic proofs. There's this one, which is from an easier to a harder, from a smaller to a greater. And also here, this is these transitory properties that they use for making these arguments. Honor is Torah because it says honor is inherit. Honor, the sages inherit, and the perfect shall inherit the good, which means the honor that the sages are inheriting. The honor is the good by this transitory property, right? And that is the Torah. The good is the Torah, and that's what they're getting to, right? Honor is Torah because the Torah is good. So, again, what's the point of this? That people who teach us Torah deserve to be given honor. If it's the case from, somebody who's really not a good person, then the average person who teaches you and who's not a bad person, they definitely deserve honor. So, again, this is another part of the mentality of what they had there, which is that, yeah, maybe some of your teachers are not great, but Achitophel was really, really bad. And so if we can give him credit, if David could give him credit, then you've got to give credit to the people who teach you, even if they're not perfect people, because that guy is really not good. And that's what a kind of a kal v'chomer argument is. If it's the case there, then the people that you're learning with, none of them are as bad as Achitophel. So that's really what they're telling you. That's why you have to give them credit. Again, this is an important idea for people who are in a learning environment, especially like, students nowadays. We kind of finish our studies when we're in college or university. People don't usually learn after that. But yeah, people have problems sometimes with their professors, with their instructors. They don't agree with maybe some of what they say, but you also give them honor by saying, if I learn something from them, I want to give them. Thank you. But if you look at somebody and say, well, that person really is not a good person, but he taught me something, and then you walk away going, well, I have to give him credit for teaching me that. And I can think of people like that.
I think we all had professors like that.
Yeah. And just have to sometimes say, well, I learned that. I give him credit for that. Or her credit. Whatever your teacher is. So that's part of the project too, is understanding that there's so much value in learning things that we cut people a break to some extent to say, we learn from them. Yeah. So that's the part of what they're want to get through to their students. These kind of values. First three we've read, you can see what's going on here, what the mentality is. So take a look at this one. This one's a little shorter, but it reminds us of some of the stuff we've read. But as I said, well, let's read this. Such is the way of life of Torah. You shall eat bread with salt, and rationed water shall you drink. You shall sleep on the ground. Your life will be one of privation, and in Torah shall you labor. If you do this, happy shall you be, and it shall be good for you. From Psalms. Happy shall you be in this world, and it shall be good for you in the world to come. And so here they break down that line from Psalms. Happy shall you be, and it shall be good for you, into two ideas. Happy in this world and good for you in the world to come. So here we have another reference to the world to come. But again, let's look at the first part of this. So again, they're making the case for why this project is important. And again, it's not so sure that this is going to be what everyone's going to do. Because at the time that the rabbis are doing this, it's still not everybody doing it. There's only some people doing it, and a limited maybe group of Jews that are doing this. And now they got a really difficult thing, which is to try to sell people on it by telling them that your life isn't going to be easy doing this. Now, why is this important? Why is this one, like maybe of the four that we've read, the one that you got to kind of think, how does this play out? Well, I will tell you this. When people are sitting in the yeshiva now in Israel, right now at this moment studying, woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go into yeshiva and study for 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day, whatever time, from the time they woke up, literally to the time they go to sleep, doing nothing else, nothing else. I mean, literally eating occasionally throughout the day and doing nothing else but studying Torah, literally every waking moment. Not one moment, I'm telling you, watching television, not one moment reading something that's not. Yeah.
Maybe with butter, and that was.
Salt is not definitely the way you want to eat bread. And it gives you a little taste, but it's basically saying that's what you're going to do. This is what you have to look forward to with your life. So it's not selling it. It's not selling it from the standpoint of you're going to be living a nice life with this kind of stuff, but it says you'll be happy. Not only will you be happy, but you're going to go to heaven. And so from that standpoint, whatever you do in this world, and this is part of what we were seeing already in the previous chapters, if this is the ticket to paradise, you can understand why people are going to do it. Because if I have to put up with in this world studying and not doing anything else and not really enjoying life, but I get to have an eternity of peace and to be in heaven, that's not so bad. If you believe that this is the way to get to heaven, so you spend 70 years in this world, but that's what you're looking forward to. People 100% believe this with their hearts. When you want to know what's animating them, the questions to some extent, to some people is, how do they not, like when they're not studying, that it's hard for them and I don't know how else to tell you this, but people literally have to be counseled by their rabbis to spend time with their kids, to spend time with their wife, because they have to have a family and they don't know how to separate themselves from their study. And they find that the time that they're not studying is a complete waste to them. We already read a text. Read a text, yeah, Johnny. We read a text already in Pirke Avot, which said you don't spend time talking to women. But I mean, that's nothing compared to this. Yeah, John.
What is their study? Is their studying like what we're doing? Is it they study by themselves? Do they have group study? Are they studying in English? They studying in Hebrew?
No, they're studying Hebrew, they're studying Hebrew and Aramaic for the most part. Some yeshivas almost all of them, the Talmud is the main text that they're studying, right? So they're going over tractates, a section of Talmud. So they'll go over sections of Talmud. Oftentimes, part of the day is spent, well, obviously some part of the day is spent praying, but a small part of it. Definitely, there's prayer times during their study day, during their day. It's not a study day. They're doing it every day. Because studying you're allowed to do on Shabbos. I mean, studying is like one of the few things you can do on Shabbos. So studying on Shabbos is also part of what they're doing on Shabbos. There's not a day off from studying. So Shabbos will be a little different in that they're probably not studying with their colleagues, with their students. They're probably in what we call a shiur, which is a group, which is like 100, 200, could be 500 people sitting in a room studying with rabbi or a few rabbis giving lectures. So the shiurs are more like lectures, shiur. They call them shiurs, but it's a shiur. It's a lesson. And those lessons are obviously, those are more what they do on Shabbos. And they can still open a book, but they're not usually studying in what we call the chavruta study, which is the study with a colleague. So most of the time they're studying with a colleague, with a study partner, or a few different study partners. So they're studying one thing with one partner, one thing with another partner. But they're just there's no end to the study, and it's usually Talmud. It's not usually Torah. So, it's interesting because there's people in this class, Mike and Mary would be some of them, who've read probably parts of the Torah more than some people who are in yeshivas have read the Torah or the rest of the Bible, because there's parts of it that are like just not studied that much. So it's amazing how there's parts of the Bible that people just they're just not that familiar with. And for most of the yeshivas, studying Bible is not the focus. Doesn't mean there aren't some that are more Bible focused than others, but because they're actually, they tend to be a little less rigid or religious.
There's 2 days of the week you do study Torah, correct?
No, there's two. So Mondays and Thursdays are days that you actually read Torah out loud. And so you go through the Parsha and reading it on Mondays and Thursdays too. So Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays were days that we read Torah, and where people still read Torah, but that's in the shul. But as far as what they're studying in the synagogue, in their outside of the synagogue, once they're like not in services, because they'll have a synagogue, the shul that's inside their learning center, their yeshiva will be there where they go daily. Sometimes they'll go back to that yeshiva if it's like certain places in Jerusalem, that's where they also pray on Shabbos. But sometimes they pray in a different place on Saturday, on Shabbos, and then they're studying in their yeshiva, locally. But there's so many yeshivas now in Israel. It's like there's so many different, it's exploded to the point where remember now, so I'm in my mid-50s. If I was an ultra-Orthodox Jew in Israel, by this point I'd be a grandfather. And so I'd already have grandkids that are maybe, 10, 9 or 10, and are moving on now into their more, moving into higher education. Yeah. And so you think about it, if everybody has 10 kids, the yeshivas there are growing exponentially. So again, Israel has a big issue right now with whether these people are going to be forced to go into the military. So, I don't know. I saw an article yesterday. No, we don't have that many yeshivas here. We have, obviously there's a lot more back east, but there's not even the amount of yeshivas in New York are nothing compared to how many there are in New Jersey. New Jersey has a huge amount of yeshivas. New Jersey is so many more yeshivas in New Jersey than there are in New York. But the Orthodox, whether the Orthodox are going to go into the army in Israel is going to perhaps bring down the government more than anything else. No, it did. I mean, this was 2 days ago. Here.
I read about it a couple of months ago. Actually.
No, this happened 2 days ago. April 1st, members of extremist faction hold up street. We would rather die than go to the draft.
Hmm.
You know what their sign says? This is crazy. Does it say it? Does it say it right here? Yeah. See this sign? Russia Zekan. That means Russia. We're living in Russia.
Wow.
Isn't that insane? 60,000.
What do you think, Rabbi? What do you think they'll do if they start taking incoming?
Look at this. This is the military bringing these guys out. I mean, look at this.
I'm serious. What do you think?
And this is, by the way, this is Netanyahu's government, right?
I-
If the non-Orthodox, if the more liberal groups take over the government, what do you think's going to happen there? I mean, look at this. These are kids.
What do you think they'd say if they started taking incoming? I'm serious.
I don't know. Look at these kids. I mean, these are 17, 16-year-old, 15-year-old kids. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen there. But these are people who are living under mindset that they're not supposed to be doing anything else but study. So, Israel created these military units, Chesder, they're called the Chesder units, which were Orthodox groups that they could study while they were doing their military conscription. They don't want to do that.
So you're thinking, I think it's out. They're going to have others.
Oh, this issue right there is going to explode. And it was already there. It was already one of the things that was splitting the country up. And now that Israel has had to fight a war where they needed everybody to fight, this has not gone away. This has become a bigger issue. They're literally saying there's people literally trying to kill us. They did kill us 6 months ago as soon as they could come over. You're not going to defend us? You're going to sit there and say that it's more important for you to be in yeshiva? They believe it. So this is why it's a major issue that Israel has to come to terms with. So I don't know what's going to happen. There are people in the Orthodox world that say they're going to leave Israel if they're forced into the military. They're saying they're going to go to other countries. I don't know.
Where?
They'll come here. They'll go to other parts of the world that they can live cheaper and just study Torah. I'm just telling you, John, that's what they're claiming they're going to do. And I'm not sure that there won't be people that'll do it. I know that some yeshivas are trying to figure out compromises, but I don't know that there is a compromise. And I don't know how you fix something that's been it's been brewing for 40, 50 years now. So
how easy is it to be ineligible for the IDF?
how easy is it?
Yeah,
Jesse just asked, how easy is it to be 4F essentially for the military in
Well, 'cause
Israel?
I know plenty of people my age are like, okay, how do I figure out how to dodge draft
Yeah, but
for the next war? Because
yeah. Well, we haven't had that issue for 50 years, but yeah, you're right. You're technically when you register for selective service, whatever, you're on the list. But I don't know. I don't know that first of all, in Israel, it's not easy to get out of the military conscription. It's almost impossible. But look, they have people who do it. There are always people who do it. The difference is that when you have a whole group of people who are doing it, it has a huge effect when you have thousands of people that are doing it. So there was always people who were kind of conscientious objectors or just didn't want to do their military service, but they knew they were taking themselves out of society by doing it. A lot of those people, they move out of the country. They know that if they take themselves out of the military, they're taking themselves, they're essentially creating a situation so they're not going to be well liked by, you know, they're going to have to explain to people why they didn't do their military service for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, but I guess why their mentality is different though, right? Cause it's more
If it-
not bad, but like self-centered. 'Cause it's
Yes,
not-
there's
it's not-
nobody,
But it's not like the Haredi don't like Israel. They're just like, I have more important things to do.
exactly,
Because at
exactly.
least people around me that I know, like when we talk about, you know, having to serve in selective service, we're like, I'm not fighting for this country. It's not worth it. Like that's in the opposite direction of
So-
what the Haredi are saying.
Yes. So it is a difficult, and those people generally support Netanyahu, I mean, obviously, so it also puts them into a weird situation.
So you're saying also that Israel is just as unstable as we are? or
Well,
more
it's
so?
different, there's different lines, there's different instabilities, there's different arguments.
I mean,
The arguments in Israel, I will say to some extent, to me, in my opinion,
It sounds like their country's just as close to balkanization as we are.
no, it's a different kind, yes, but it's a different kind. I will say that the issues in Israel, in my opinion, are more substantial, actually. I think the issues that separate us are in some cases, I won't say frivolous, but I let's put it this way, they're not what drove our country apart in the Civil War, yet, you know, might be as close as that to having our country fracture, but whatever. I think that the issues in Israel are actually substantial. These are substantial issues of how you can run a country with some people serving the country and some people not. And again, if Israel can figure out a way to have national service that doesn't require people to serve in the military, would they still do it? I don't know. They feel their national service is studying. I mean, that's what they do. They feel that their national service is studying Torah. And to some extent, Israel has let that happen for 50 years. But they can't afford to continue to let that happen. The system won't continue. It can't continue to work that way when there's so many people that are opting out. That would
What about the
percentage.
comment you're saying on self-defense and warfare?
Well, that's an interesting one. So Jesse says, what about self-defense? So here's yes.
Someone's gonna hurt you, kill them first.
Yes.
And if they spend all their time studying that, then they should know that the Arabs who
So-
want to kill them, they should shoot them first.
Correct. But here's the issue. Is Israel's military at a point where if those people aren't serving yet, I mean, the feeling is that it's getting that way. But I don't think that most people feel that if those 70, 80,000 young people who should have been in the military, and even in a Chesder unit, if they had been in the unit, would they have been able to stop October 7th from happening? I don't know that people in Israel feel that. That's the difference. But I think people feel that, look, I mean, I'm making the argument from here, but I can tell you what my friends in Israel are saying, and what I kind of see is that, look, this is a fight for our survival, and you're sitting on the sidelines, you're not participating in it, and you're not doing anything. So that's the problem. And people feel like we're subsidizing you. And so we're sitting there sending our kids to the military. We're paying taxes, a pretty high tax rate, and you're doing absolutely nothing. So that's what I think people are feeling right now in Israel. So that's the issue. I don't know.
I know colleagues of mine are feeling that.
What was that?
I know colleagues of mine are feeling those exact feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard not to see that, but I don't, again, I'm not making the argument for it. I'm just trying to explain it. For 50 years, 75 years since Israel existed, but it's really been an issue for the last 50 years, or maybe even, let's say, the last 30 or 40 years, when the population of that Orthodox group grew so large that, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, It's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a big, I think it's a huge problem. All right. But this is why we're dealing with this, because when people look at this, they're saying, look, it's not like we live a great life when we're studying Torah, right? This is the life that they're basically being promised, a life of privation, right? A life where you're never going to be wealthy. Remember, some people, I mean, some of these kids come from wealthier backgrounds too. And their parents have said, look, I didn't get to study Torah as much as I would like to. You're going to study Torah your whole life. And so the kids are going off and they're studying and they're essentially, I mean, maybe, and again, they get more support than other people because they're getting money from their parents in addition to whatever stipend they get from the government. These kids they know that whatever life they could have had if they weren't studying, this is the life that they're bound to have. And remember, it's done, man. They've given up a chance to have a college education. They're not learning skills. They're not going to learn a trade. They're not going to, Israel is one of the most high-tech countries in the world, and they're taking themselves out of, an ability they're not learning math. I mean, they're not learning science. They're not learning basic stuff. So they're taking themselves out of the ability to earn, a living. I mean, they're consigning themselves to that. And they're fine. People are fine with that. Because again, they believe that whatever they have to lose in this world, they're going to get it in the next world. And look, there's something to be said for, like, if I can live like this, then I'm serving a higher ideal. So, yeah, this is what I'm saying. When I read this text, when I read this paragraph, I think about people who are doing this right now and the consequences that it has. But like I said, it's not just in Israel. There's people doing this in America right now. Thousands of people in America are doing the same thing. The Lakewood Yeshiva, right now, there's thousands of people at this very moment in the middle of the night that are studying because they don't want to go to sleep. They don't want to close their eyes because that's time that they're away from the Torah. I'll show you the picture of what Lakewood Yeshiva looks like right now. Let's see if there's a cam going on right now. No, well, it's all over the place there, but let me just see something.
Well, what kind of study is it? Whether they just open the scroll and just read it front to back and then.
No, they're reading, they've got, they have volumes and volumes of Talmud. They're not reading Torah. I mean, they're reading, for the most part, they're reading tractates of Talmud. Here's a picture of this is the largest yeshiva. I think it might, I don't know if it's the largest in the world, but let me just see this. It's the second largest. Yeah, the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem is the largest. So this is the second largest in the world, which is in New Jersey. So it's the second largest yeshiva. As of 2019, it had 6,700 students, 2,700 regulars, and 3,900 Kollel status. So Kollel means they're not quite studying there 24/7, but they're studying there on a limited basis. But they have 2,700 students there. They're studying all the time. Okay, so this is, they have 4 campuses on 35 acres in Lakewood. It's a pretty big area, right? So one of their buildings seats 1,000 for holidays. Yeah. So.
Rabbi, there's no webcam.
No, I was looking for it if they had one out in front, but
When you said Lakewood, I thought you were talking about Lakewood, California.
no. In your neighborhood, no. This is though I will tell you that Lakewood, that Lakewood, it was not a Jewish area. It was not a Jewish area before these dudes moved in. So, I will share with you that before, so if you look at Lakewood Township, New Jersey, you look at their picture, what do they have on their Wikipedia page? The Beit Midrash Gavoha, right? The largest yeshiva outside of Israel, it's called. But if you look at it, it's it says the township's population was 135,000, right? Right, but it's become basically an Orthodox city. So the whole city has become Orthodox. It wasn't always like that. So, initially it was kind of a white area, think of pretty much a white area, not necessarily Jewish area. I guess parts of New Jersey are, more ethnically diverse, to use the politically correct term, but it's become a very, very different area. So you can see 6,400 were registered as Democrats, 13,000 were registered as Republican. That is one of the highest percentages of Republican registration in all of New Jersey. Yep. That
There
is,
you go. Jewish Republicans. How about that?
yeah. So if you want to know where that happens, it happens there. So, yeah, there's a lot of people who live nearby, or, the yeshiva, who are not happy with what happened to their town, but the town essentially became Orthodox. So, yeah. So, we think about New York, but it's not just there. It's not just in the city. There's also parts of Rockland County, New York, and everybody talks about the city, Brooklyn and Manhattan having Jewish communities, but Rockland County has a huge Jewish population, and so does some of the other parts of that area upstate. They call it upstate, but it's really Sullivan and Ulster counties and Orange County, New York, that have huge Orthodox populations. There's the city Kiryas Joel, which is a town. It's all Orthodox. It's the entire town is Orthodox. It's like a Amish shtetl, and it's entirely an Orthodox, ultra Orthodox area, and it's in Orange County, New York. Yeah. So
Who underwrites these facility?
The parts of the community up until now, and I say up, there was a huge, there was a separation to some extent between the people who worked and the people who studied. Now there's so many more people that study that it's tough to support it, because they've grown exponentially, and now there's not enough people that were working. But they used to be, some of the communities were completely supported by people in the diamond business. And like, here's Kiryas Joel, which is in Orange County, New York. And it is, the population there now is 39,000. 39,000. And the entire population, right, is Jewish. This shows the demographics, right? These are all Jews. 91% of the people only speak Yiddish at home. I mean, it's unbelievable. It started in 1977 with 500 people. Okay. This is in America, right? This is not in Israel. This is an entire, the local transit within the area is operated by the Village of Kiryas Joel bus system, and they go into Manhattan. They go into different parts of New York, but they go into the Diamond District. These are people who work in the Diamond District, and that's where they live. So, yeah, it's a crazy thing, right? So,
Especially because it said up there that their median household income is like $15,000.
yeah.
In New York, that's not, anywhere that's not like.
No. but I mean, most families only have one income and many children. Resulting poverty rate makes a disproportionate number of families in Curacao eligible for welfare benefits. Right? Because of the sheer size of the families, the average household here has 6 people, but it's not uncommon for 8 to 10 children. Right? 62% of the local families live below poverty level. So to answer your question, John,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
see?
Yeah.
But again,
They don't speak English, so it's not like I can just drop by, right?
no, but I used to occasionally, I mean, it wasn't exactly on my way, but sometimes, if I had somebody visiting, I would take them by. It's right by where it's right by where Ronnie and Phyllis Nathan live. So I had my student congregation there in Orange County was right by there, and I would drive through it just to see it because like it's just an amazing thing. I mean, they don't throw stones, they don't throw stones at your car, but I mean, I guess if you're driving on Shabbos, but you just use, you don't do it you don't do it on Shabbat. But if you look here, I'll show you. If you look at the
You
if you
pull
look
out your magnetized Star of David, put it on the side of your car.
No, I don't think they care. I mean, honestly, I think if you look at here, I'll show you where it is in relation to Manhattan. So when you see where Curious Joel is, so let me just share it with you here. So this is so I don't need to give directions from where I am now, but see, this is Orange County. This is the 87, right? This is the freeway that people take to go up north from the city. But when they go up from across here on the George Washington Bridge, or they take the Tappan Zee Bridge across, you just go up here and you're in Curious Joel, right? And so my student pulpit was down here in Greenwood Lake. And this is all, you can drive on, this is all country. This is all beautiful lakes and little towns and villages. But this whole town right here, this whole town, all these streets are inhabited by Orthodox Jews who only speak Yiddish. Every one of these streets here, every one of them they're ultra-Orthodox Jews. So it's crazy. I mean, like literally, you can't believe that there's only Jews. But I mean, there is nobody else who can own a home in this area. Can't buy one. You can't. The land is all owned by it's all owned by the community, and that's it. I don't mean that there's like people who are Jewish, not Jewish. There are people who are Reformed Jews. Every single family there is ultra Orthodox. So this is happening in America. I mean, like this isn't just in Israel, and this isn't just something that is happening, in the land of Israel. This is happening in our own country. And, again, they're living on federal money too. So technically it's our money, but the state of New York is subsidizing a lot of their stuff, especially their healthcare. Yeah.
That brings up a pretty good point. You know how we do Europe trips and Israel trips? Maybe we should do an East Coast trip.
Yeah, and if we went to New York, I would definitely take people up to see this. And on the way, there's like 2 or 3 other places that are kind of like this, but no place is like Curious Joel. No place is like this, and that every single home is Jewish. Like New Square has a whole ultra Orthodox area in New Square.
Bit of tension between like already Jews, not very Orthodox practicing Jews like us.
Where?
Just with Haredis or
Yeah, are you talking about in America or in Israel? Yeah, I think in general.
Like if you showed up in their town, I don't know how appreciative they'd be of it.
Yes, so yes, if you drive through and point and get out and take a picture with them, they wouldn't like it.
We're not. It's not a zoo.
It's like the Amish country.
No, I know, but I think if you drive through and you look, I don't know. I mean,
Why can't we
Look.
go, why can't we go to a shul, take pictures just like we do in Israel
I understand, but again, they're generally,
or Europe?
the Satmar generally are disdain, like, they don't want people from the outside in their community. They really don't. They don't want them there at all because quite frankly, they're worried that we're gonna pollute their environment. And so it's bad enough that some of them have to work in the city. Like the people who work in the city are already, they're already running a risk of being infected with the outside world. But they really do look at it like that. They really do look at it. It is
Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, but how do you, then you run into a gene pool, right? So I mean, sorry to take time on this, but I mean, you have to marry outside the community or you're gonna have right? Am I missing something here? Or there's gonna be an issue with the gene pool?
Look, there are people who become part of that community, and so the gene
Okay.
pool gets somewhat refreshed. But yes, it's overwhelmingly Satmar are overwhelmingly from Hungary, and so they're overwhelmingly from groups, certain small groups of families. Yes, and they have a higher rate of genetic diseases, but they don't look at that. They don't look at it like you and I do, which is that there's a way to stop that, which is increasing, marrying outside of certain families. They don't look at it that way because people have been marrying their cousins for centuries. So as long as they're able to procreate, look, they don't want to have kids who are developmentally disabled, don't get me wrong. But on the
Right.
other hand, they're not going to marry outside of their community to stop that. They just say, look, God's cursed us with, this thing. They're not going to look at it like
Can't they just go to other Hasidic communities?
they can, but they generally don't because the Satmar are very different. Their community in particular is very, very, very anti other groups. They're very internally, and they've had friction within their own group. Some of the Satmar are very anti-Israel and some of them are not. So that's why I want to be careful. They don't say all of them are anti-Israel. But when you see those Orthodox Jews that are going to Iran and that are condemning Israel, those are Satmar, but they're not all Satmar. They're some Satmar. So they're not all like that. I don't want to say they're like all Satmar are like that, but they tend to be a little bit. I mean, when they come from that standpoint, they're Satmar. But again, not all Satmar are like each other. So there's arguments within their own group.
Question with
Yeah.
the yeshiva thing you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Why would they spend so much time on Talmud instead of?
Torah?
Yeah. Because I
Um,
get that Talmud is
because-
an important interpretation,
because,
but it's still written by men.
yes, but they believe that the Talmud was given to them at Mount Sinai along with the written Torah, right? They believe that, as it said in Pirke Avot, that the Torah was given to them, and that this included not just the written Torah, but the oral Torah as well. And so they believe the written Torah was given as well as the oral Torah. The fact that the rabbis discovered these passages or made these connections is just the fact that they uncovered it, but God gave it to they didn't make it up. So it's a difficult argument to make because clearly somebody told them that, but they believe that these laws were passed down, that the rabbi didn't invent it. And so what they do believe is that when you quote the Bible, you're basically saying, oh, well, this is something that you found within the Bible. So that phrase, hafach ba, that we read last week, everything is in it. They literally believe everything is in it. So if you come to them and say, well, but the Torah didn't talk about genetics. So they say, yes, it did. If you read this is actually says, they interpret it saying, no, this is talking about genetics. So they believe it's all there. So, if we haven't found it yet, it's just because we haven't seen it, but it's there. So, but then it's always connecting it back to that. You can't just say, well, we have this new law. No, we don't have a new law. It's based on this law and we uncovered it. We've kind of deciphered it, but it was there. So you look at it like they mined it out of the Torah because it was there. Just, we didn't find it. We hadn't found it yet. So I believe it's there. You know, it's just a matter of shaking it out of it. So let's read this next one. Yeah. Do not seek greatness for yourself. Do not covet honor. Practice more than you learn. Do not yearn for the table of kings, for your table is greater than their table, and your crown is greater than their crown. And faithful is your employer to pay you the reward of your labor. So, again, when we talk about who they're working for, who they're serving, again, who these people are serving, like I told you, like it started out, I mean, we've read previous texts about why what the rabbis were doing is important. But now you're really seeing how serious this is for them. This is not, again, and that's why we started talking about the yeshivas and what's happened, you know, what happens in our world today. The fact that we have the ability to do this now, the fact that for the most part, Jews are able to study in peace because there is in Israel and because we live in, so many of us live in America where we've been given tremendous opportunities and tremendous safety and security for the most part. Look, don't be trying to do stuff for the sake of your own success. Okay? Don't try to sit at the table of kings, right? Your table, the table that you're studying at, is better than being at the king's table. Your crown already, the crown of Torah, is greater than their crown. And remember who you're working for, right? You're working for God. And God is the only employer that's going to pay you what you deserve. Your real reward, of course, is the world to come. It's living a life, an eternal life of peace. And that's what you should be doing. So all the things that, again, keeping you humble, keeping you focused on what's really important. And the fact that, again, when people say, how could you say I should be earning money from somebody who's going to pay me more than God? Do you understand? Like, people could literally quote this line as a justification for why they don't earn a living. How do I know? I just read it in the Talmud. I read it from, again, even older than Talmud. We're reading it from the early part of the Talmud, the Mishnah. This tells us that the rabbis have been teaching this to themselves, to their teachers, to their teaching a student, generation to generation, that's who you should be working for. So if you believe this, if you live this way, that's who your employer is. That's the only person you should be working for. The only entity you should be working for is God.
Tell that to Tracy.
Yes, well, fortunately, my wife earns a living, which is helpful for me. But yeah, I mean, there were many cases of women or fathers or mothers or whoever who supported their kids so that they could study. But the understanding was, of course, that the Torah that you learned was from them. And, you know, you'd give credit to the people who supported you, whether it was a spouse or your parents. You'd say that the Torah that I've learned is because of them, right? You give credit to them for your Torah. But again, you're doing it for the sake of who you're really working for, which is God, right? So this is who we're working for, really. So we're going to finish with this one today, which I think is a long one. Yeah, it's kind of summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. but let's take a look. It's a long one. Greater is learning Torah than the priesthood and the royalty, right? So it's comparing three things. Torah, kahuna, the priesthood, and malchut, royalty. So as far as they're concerned, there's like three categories of, I've talked about it before, of keter, of a crown, but of prestige that you could attain, right? Priesthood to some extent, I mean, you can be born into that. And royalty also can really only be born into that. But Torah, if you're thinking about that being your path in life, or how you're going to kind of be known, it says royalty is acquired by 30 stages and the priesthood by 24, but the Torah by 48. So what are they talking about? What are these 48 things that are part of Torah learning as opposed to these priesthood ones and the royalty ones? And we really don't, well, let's take a look at it. Let's look at the 48 things. Okay? So these are the 48 things. This is why I say it was so long, right? So here it is. This is an interesting one. Really is interesting. So here's how you achieve Torah learning. Study, attentive listening, proper speech, by an understanding heart, by an intelligent heart, by awe, by fear, by humility, by joy, by attending to the sages, by critical give and take with friends, by fine argumentation with disciples, by clear thinking, by study of scripture, which is Tanakh, the Bible, by study of Mishnah, by a minimum of sleep, by a minimum of chatter, by a minimum of pleasure, by a minimum of frivolity, by a minimum of preoccupation with worldly matters, by long suffering, by generosity, by faith in the sages, by acceptance of suffering. And then it says again, learning Torah is also acquired by one who recognizes his place, who rejoices in his portion, who makes offense about his words, who takes no credit for himself, who is loved, who loves God, who loves his fellow creatures, who loves righteous ways, who loves reproof, who loves uprightness, who keeps himself far from honors, who does not let his heart become swelled on account of his learning, who does not delight in giving legal decisions, who shares in the bearing of burden with his colleague, who judges with the scales weighted in his favor, who leads him on to truth, who leads him on to peace, who composes himself at his study, who asks and answers, who listens to others and himself adds to his knowledge, who learns in order to teach, who learns in order to practice, who makes his teacher wiser, who is exact in what he has learned, and who says a thing in the name of him who said it. That's the last one. He who says a thing in the name of him who said it. Thus you have learned, everyone who says a thing in the name of him who said it brings deliverance into this world. As it is said, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. So what's interesting is that they derived this line from the book of Esther, which is that when Esther speaks to the king, she says in Mordecai's name, B'Shem Mordecai, right? And so again, if you look at that line, it says, V'tomer Esther l'melech B'Shem Mordecai. Esther did this great thing, and she never stopped from giving credit to her uncle Mordecai. So she didn't just tell the king. Again, if you look at this, because we just read the story a couple weeks ago, it's the story of how Bigtan and Teresh were plotting against the king, right? And they wanted to kill King Ahasuerus. And Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther. and Esther reported it in Mordecai's name. So that famous scene is the one that they're talking about, that Mordecai was able to save the king's life by telling Esther, and she gave her uncle credit. And of course, that's what helped save the Jews, because Mordecai ended up becoming the way to stop Haman, right? So what we learn from that is that we have to give credit to, and they save that one for the end, and they save that one for the proof text, is to make sure that you give credit when you teach something, and it comes from somebody else. So one of the reasons why you see that so much in the Talmud is you'll say this, Rabbi so-and-so said in the name of so-and-so, because they believe that if somebody was teaching something that somebody else taught them, you always had to give credit for it. And it's the right thing to do. Because what's interesting here is not that people are trying to find what we call in the Talmudic world, the Jewish world, a chiddush, something new that they discovered. Unlike our world, where we give credit to somebody who discovers something new and made it up to some extent, like discovered this new technology or created something new. Like the best example is like a Steve Jobs, an innovator. Judaism actually sees this as not something that they put a lot of stock in traditionally, because what really is important is uncovering and teaching something that you learn from somebody else. Because then there's a chain of tradition. Then it goes back to Moses. Because if so-and-so learned it from so-and-so, then maybe he learned it from somebody too. And so it's not so much coming up with a new idea, finding look, if somebody's teaching something and they quoted it, and even if he quoted it in someone else's name, you're still doing something really important, which is giving people an understanding of something that they didn't understand before. But it's not like you're creating a new thought. You're uncovering the thought, or you're uncovering this teaching that was there all the time, but you exposed it to the world. It's more like you're discovering something that was already there, but you just discovered it, right? You didn't discover, Edmund Hillary and Tingman Norgay. They didn't discover Mount Everest. They're the first people that reported that they went to the top of Mount Everest. They didn't make Mount Everest. They didn't innovate it. It wasn't something new, but they were the first people that reported that they had been here. Then the New World Columbus didn't discover the New World. People were living here already. He's the first person that went back with a map and said, this is how you get to the New World. But we, of course, in our world, tend to look at innovation as the only thing that's valuable. And what's interesting is, for us in Jewish tradition, what's really valuable is uncovering these things and recognizing that I didn't invent this. I didn't discover this. I'm maybe the first person that gave this insight before, but look, every time I thought I've had a new insight into something in the Torah, turns out that somebody said that a long time ago. And, that's somewhat deflating, but it really isn't supposed to be. In Judaism, it's not supposed to be that way. We're not supposed to, again, we don't take credit for ourselves. That's one of the things that we're supposed to do, is not take credit for ourselves, right? We're not supposed to, we're not supposed to be thinking about this as if we're getting our heart swelled because of our learning, right? So this is why we are supposed to be engaging in, and again, it doesn't mean you don't look for these things, but the motivation isn't to come up with a new teaching which didn't exist before. It's to find it, and maybe even find that the connection was made by somebody long before you made the connection. That's part of what, again, like maybe people forgot it. Maybe people didn't understand it. Maybe you recontextualized it. You let people see it in a new way for the time that we are now, right? So there's things that we talked about when we talked about it, in our Tuesday class a couple weeks ago, when we read Jonah, which again, didn't really come into my mind until after October 7th. So the last time we studied Jonah, which was October 1st or whatever it was, whatever day Yom Kippur was, September 29th, whatever, it was almost like a week before. No, it was like 10 days before. So it was like September 27th or whatever. Well, the last time I studied it on Yom Kippur with people, I didn't see things in Jonah that I saw, 2 weeks ago when we read it on Tuesday. So, maybe, it was always there. I just didn't see it. And again, probably what I was thinking is what people thought 2,000 years ago when they read it. They just looked at it in a different way. So, and generally speaking, by the way, I give credit if I find the source of who said it, I give credit to it, and I somewhat feel vindicated by saying that, like, yeah, I didn't invent this. I don't need to invent it. I'm going to share it with people. But I also know that, like, my teaching is based on tradition. It's based on something that we've believed for a long time, which again, I feel comforted by, and knowing that I didn't have to invent it. It was always there. But again, maybe I didn't see it. Maybe I didn't think about it. Maybe I didn't see it. But so that's what's supposed to be motivating us when we're studying and when we're yeah.
So when this was written, wasn't rabbis yet, they were sages.
They were rabbis. They were rabbis.
They were calling sages.
Yeah, but they're rabbis. I think the phrase that they use here, generally speaking, when they're talking about, the word that they use when they translate that as sages, right, is chachamim, right? So the wise people, but
Oh, okay.
but
They just translated
as sages. They translate in chachamim as sages. So that's what they're translating as, which is fine. They at this stage they don't use the term rabbanim yet very often. They start to. It's not as common. It's much more common in the Gemara, where they'll talk about the rabbanim. They'll talk about them as the title of rabbis, but they were still at this point. They would say that this person's a rabbi, but yeah, seeing themselves as the group called the rabbis, they still didn't do that a lot. They do call themselves chachamim, which again, we translate as sages. But look, we call it Pirke Avot. It's not the ethics of the rabbis. We call it the ethics of the sages, of our sages, or translate it literally, which is ethics of our fathers, right? But we don't call it the ethics of the rabbis. But they didn't, yes, they weren't calling themselves rabbis as much. Of course they call, look, this guy is, it says right here, it says, Rabbi Meir. It says, that he's the rabbi, he's a rabbi. But again, calling themselves as a group of rabbis, they're not doing it as much. I'm trying to think like why they do that or when they start doing it. It's really not until the Middle Ages even that you'll hear them talking about it as when they talk about themselves in a group, as a group. It's interesting. And they didn't call themselves Pharisees, right? Before they were rabbis, they were referred to as Pharisees, right? Which, like Prushim, they were called Prushim, but they didn't call themselves Prushim. That's what Josephus called them. That's what the society called them. Maybe that's what the Sadducees called them. Right? The Sadducees called themselves that because they were Tzaddokim. They were descendants of Sadok. That's nothing like weird at all. They're descendants of Sadok. They're Kohanim. They're Kohanim. They were Levites, and then they were descendants of Aaron. They weren't all Aaronites because most of the Aaronites weren't. They were Sadducees. They were from Sadok. They were the Kohanim who ended up becoming the priests in the temple of Jerusalem. So look, people change their names but it really wasn't until the Middle Ages where the rabbis themselves start talking about themselves with the terms Rabbanim. It starts in the Talmud, but it really into that period. Because a lot of times when they talked about themselves as a group, they would talk about themselves like as part of the Sanhedrin, or they talk about themselves as part of the Beit Midrash, of the house of study, but they, they very rarely call themselves, the rabbis, because they lived in different communities. They didn't, I don't think they saw themselves as necessarily as a class of people, but maybe, again, well, maybe they did see themselves as a class, maybe that's not the right word, but they didn't refer to themselves as a class of society yet. But look what they said. They said, look, you're not priests, you're not royalty, right? You're people that are learning Torah, right? And like, for them, that's what they were doing. They were engaged in the study of Torah. But the fact is that they said, when they talk about themselves here, they're 100% using the word Chachamim. There's no question. Every time that they're talking about, when it says sages, every time it uses the word sages as a group, that's the word Chachamim. That's the only word that they're using. And they, as you saw, they used it a couple times. But you can also see they're saying, look, what are the things that rabbis do? They give legal decisions, they judge things, but they're also saying, don't take delight in it, right? Don't think that giving a legal decision is something you should love doing. Now, of course, why would someone love doing it? Because they have power. They have power in doing that. They're saying, that's not something you should look forward to doing. And definitely share it. Yeah. Well, they did, yeah. In these communities that they were guiding, they were leading, and they were helping, they were starting to take more of a leadership, because the priesthood and the royalty, they had nothing by this point. So the rabbis were looked to as authorities for the community. But it's also saying, share that authority with other people, right? Shares in the bearing of burden with colleague. This is the burden of responsibilities, of authority, judged with the scales weighted in the favor of the people that you're looking at. That's also, when you're given that, yep, where he learned to do that. Yeah. So these are all great. I mean, if you think about it, these are all great principles. These are all great things to live by. And, it just doesn't just apply to people that are engaged in studying Torah or rabbis, but, obviously some of them are much more rabbinic in nature by, again, what people are studying, but you can see they're studying Tanakh, they're studying Mishnah, and again, they're engaging in as little of stuff as possible that is not connected to their study, which includes preoccupation with worldly matters, which is, again, doing stuff that is not related to Torah. So again, that doesn't mean that they're not supposed to care about other people. They're supposed to, have a good heart. You're supposed to, be nice to people. You're supposed to love your fellow human beings, right? You're supposed to want to be righteous. You're supposed to love God and do all those things that are treating people well. But there's this understanding that you're going to suffer. You're going to accept your suffering. And it's not an easy life. It's not going to be an easy life. They're telling people it's not going to be an easy life. So there's a lot here that you can see when you're talking to somebody who's living this life. If they're living this life with all these principles, it's going to be, it's not going to be easy, but it's also going to be very principled and very ethical, and should be a life where you're doing the right thing. By the way, when you get into some of the stuff that I did not show you, which is that Kiryas Joel has been in trouble many times with the law, when you get into how can these people break the law, while they're doing all these really great things, well, it gets to the point of they're saying, we don't care about the outside world. We don't care about the laws that exist outside of our laws. And this is why sometimes they engage in illegal behavior that's embarrassing, to say the least. But again, they're not looking at it from the standpoint of, this is not our priority, is following the laws of our country. So that is disappointing. And it is something that happens on a fairly regular, regular time there. Because they build houses that are not according to, you know, they add on to their homes, and they don't have permission to construct certain things. And they, you know, sometimes they'll have problems, they'll have fires, they'll have construction problems that, you know, they're part of their house will collapse, and the government will, you know, somebody will come out from the county and they'll say, you know, you didn't have permission to do this. I'll just look at them like, we have permission from God and don't really care, you know? So it's a strange life, but it's one that there are thousands of people in America that are living like this. And as far as they're concerned, I mean, some of them want to be treated just like the Amish. The problem is that they're getting federal money, and they're getting welfare money, they're getting state money. And, you know, you can't really, as far as I'm concerned, have it both ways. If you're going to live for the benefit of the country, then you got to follow the rules. So again, not everybody is breaking the law all the time. It's not like I don't want to say that they're always doing crime. They're not doing crimes, but they're just not paying attention to the laws. And they just don't feel that it applies to them. So it's not right. And it's not according to Jewish law, by the way, because Jewish law has a principle in the Talmud, Dina Malchuta Dina, which is the law of the land is the law, which means you have to follow the law of your country. And that is a line from the Talmud. So whenever somebody who's Orthodox is breaking the law, all you have to remind people is this line right here, which we'll finish with right now. I'm not going to read today, but the law of the land not only applies to Israelite or Jewish government, also to non-Jewish governments are concerning the law of the government of the law of the government must be respected as the law of the Torah.
What happens when the law of the land, you know where I'm going?
Yeah, the law of the land contradicts the law of the Torah, right? Well, in those cases, you can guess what the ultra-Orthodox communities are going to do.
Right.
So the statement Dina Malchuta Dina appears 4 times in the Talmud and is a nod to Jewish acquiescence to Gentile authority, as also to Jewish secular authority. So that is something that is also understood to be an issue within Israel today. So application to modern Israel. There are those who allege the Talmud cites Dina as applying only to the laws of a Gentile government, while the sovereignty of a Jewish king is never cited. So there's people who say that doesn't really work in Israel because it only requires to a non-Jewish sovereign, which is ironic. So this is something that Israel has to deal with too. But so for example, right here, Israel's inheritance rights, direct care for the British Mandate, which stipulated that females and males had equal inheritance. However, in Mosaic law, it's divided amongst the sons. So since rabbinic courts are unable to bypass the secular law in the state, nor can they cancel both clause, they circumvent the issue by encouraging the head of the family to write out a last will before his death, in which case the father is able to bequeath a hefty portion to his eldest son, right? So it's the only way for it to happen in Israel. But there is a way, because you write out a will, so you can divide it up. But if there is no will in Israel, they're going to separate it according to the laws in Israel, which are laws from the British, which are very similar to our laws. So, yes, we are supposed to have the law of the land is supposed to be the law. So I do want to make it clear that this is not, yeah, so just remember that. Yeah, so a lot to take in, a lot to think about. As I said, This is a lot on the rabbinic project, if you will, what we're supposed to do or what's guided us as the way we're supposed to devote ourselves to study. And it is definitely something that I think about in my own life a lot, because when people say, well, what does a rabbi do? And I say, well, there's a lot of things that we do, and some of them are ancient and some of them are definitely modern. And a lot of them, believe it or not, that we think of as main rabbinic duties are not things that rabbis did during this time. Because when you went through that long list of what the rabbis did, nowhere does it say, you're going to do a lot of funerals. You're going to do a lot of weddings. You're going to be doing a lot of bar mitzvah training. Not a lot of that is in there, but that's a huge part of what, of course, rabbis do today. So,
You're also not a quote community Christian in a way. A different.
oh yeah, whole lot of things that are not there. So we have services this Friday. It is going to be Rick and Addie instead of Wendy, because Wendy has COVID, but she's doing okay. She's not super sick, but this does not surprise me because Eddie was with COVID the week before, which is why he wasn't at Purim. So yes, it did get to Wendy. So we are having a new member Shabbat. But I do want to tell people that just today, so it hasn't gone out yet, it will go out soon. Today, unfortunately, we announced the funeral for Leon, but next week, next Tuesday, we're going to have a very special visitors, 3 visitors. We're going to be here at our synagogue who were survivors of the Nova attack. 2 young guys who were brothers who were working as bodyguards that day. They were working on staff. And then one of their friends too, Amit. So the 3 of them are going to be here at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, and they're going to be telling their story. They'll be here to answer questions. They may be bringing another friend with them as well, who's a survivor of these attacks. And yeah, this the Nova Music Festival.
Oh, okay.
So they were there. They lived in the area. They live their towns were also attacked, and they lost. Yeah, they're here in LA for a couple weeks. They lost several friends, and they've lost family members, and they're going to be here telling their story. So just happened today. We just decided we came up with the day today on their schedule. We're going to record it. We're going to stream it. We're going to record it. We're going to have a chance for you to. I don't know how much of it we're going to be able to edit out. It's not for JLT, it's for our community.
It's not jail.
I mean, it could be if it's appropriate, if it's the type of thing we can share, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is for you in this community to hear their story, to meet them, to talk to them, to comfort them to some extent. I mean, I feel like we need to let them know that they know, I hope they know, but we want them to know that we stand with them and we support them and we care for them. I mean, this guy I talked to today, I think he's 23, 24. It's my kid's age. And he said his hearing has been affected. He's already been diagnosed. His hearing has been affected by the explosions, by the stuff that happened to him that day. And his hearing may never come back. Interestingly, they have a treatment for hearing loss that they developed in Israel, which he might actually be cured by, but it's a technology that they actually developed in Israel. So I'm hoping that his hearing will come back. But yeah, I mean, he actually has not just the psychological trauma, but I can't believe, somebody, like, guy, whatever. He'll be here. He'll tell you a story. So, let's wrap up. And again, as I mentioned, we'll look forward to seeing you soon and getting ready for Passover and getting our minds around hopefully freedom. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye,
Goodness.
thank you.
Love you. Bye.